There is a silence more deafening than thunder. It is the silence of betrayal, not from strangers, but from those who knew your soul, the ones who saw your tears and chose to add weight to your suffering, the ones who smiled at your pain, whose joy was kindled every time you stumbled, every time you wept alone in the corners of your private world. They did not just watch you suffer. They wanted it. They plotted for it. They lit the fire and walked away, fully expecting you to be consumed by the flames. But what they never realized is that God was standing in the fire with you. They helped you. When people design your downfall, they assume they are more powerful than the one who made you. They calculate your weaknesses but forget your God. They gather in shadows, speak curses in whispers, and expect heaven to be deaf. But heaven was not deaf. Heaven was silent, and that silence was sacred. Because when God is silent, He is not absent. He is preparing. And when He prepares, it is never just for your rescue. It is for their reckoning. They wanted to see you suffer because your light threatened the darkness in them. Your peace disturbed their chaos. Your kindness convicted their cruelty. So they did what cowards do. They attacked what was beautiful because they could not understand it. They wounded what was whole because they could not become it. But here is the mystery of pain. When surrendered to God, it becomes the seed of power. They thought you were buried, but you were being planted. They thought the silence meant God forgot you, but He was writing a louder story, one they would be forced to watch unfold. They will watch the peace they tried to destroy surround you like a river. They will witness the very storms they sent drown their own pride. For every tear you cried, God has measured a recompense. For every act of cruelty, a divine echo returns, not by your hand, but by heaven's decree. The flood they hoped would break you will be the flood that exposes them, their intentions, their actions, their secrets. God does not always stop the weapon. Sometimes He lets it be formed so that when it fails, everyone sees who formed it. That's the justice of God. Not always fast, but always final. You don't need revenge when you're walking with the one who sees everything, hears everything, and remembers everything. You survived because your suffering was not a sentence. It was a setup for spiritual strength. The fire didn't consume you, it refined you. And now, while they are being swallowed in the waters they stirred, you are walking on higher ground, stronger, wiser, chosen. So let them laugh, let them mock, let them gather, but never forget. When God lifts His hand, the same ones who tried to break you will find themselves broken, not because you fought back, but because heaven fights for those who kept their hearts pure in the midst of evil. You were never alone, not for a second. And now their darkness is turning against them, and the suffering they wanted for you has become the shadow they can't escape. Now, pause. Feel that breath returning to your chest. That's what freedom sounds like. That's what vindication feels like. And it's only just beginning. There's a sacred mystery in the way God operates. He does not always interrupt the whispers spoken in secret rooms or the laughter shared behind your back. He lets the plot unfold, not because He is powerless to stop it, but because He is preparing a response so divine it renders every human scheme meaningless. When they planned your downfall, when they sowed seeds of chaos in your path, when they looked you in the eyes and smiled while holding a dagger behind their back, God was watching. You may have wondered why He stayed silent, why the heavens didn't shatter with justice the moment you were wronged. You questioned whether your prayers evaporated into the night, unheard and unacknowledged. But the truth is this: God saw everything. Not one glance, not one word, not one cruel action escaped His notice. He let the scheme continue not because He was absent, but because He was allowing them to write the very script that will become their own undoing. When evil appears to thrive, it is only because it is being given enough rope to hang itself. God allows darkness to rise, not so it may win, but so it may be exposed. What they thought was strategy was being recorded. What they believed was victory was being weighed. They assumed your silence meant weakness, that your pain meant defeat, but God was preparing a scene so dramatic in reversal, so undeniable in glory, that no one would question where the strength came from. He protected your soul while letting your enemies write their own story. He kept your heart intact while your name was being torn apart. And when the time was right, not a moment too soon, not a breath too late, he began to shift the ground beneath them. It wasn't you who needed to defend yourself. It wasn't you who had to prove your innocence. Heaven became your courtroom, and the judge who presides over eternity had already written his verdict. You see, God often allows the storm to swirl so he can show you he controls the wind. He lets the arrow fly so he can show them it will not strike you. He allows betrayal to occur so that he may turn it into a blessing that cannot be denied. They thought they could define you by your suffering, but God redefined you through it. You didn't crumble, you were carved. You didn't fall. It is one of the deepest comforts of the soul, knowing that while people plotted destruction, God was writing resurrection. You are not standing today because they failed. You are standing because God succeeded. And now, as the tides begin to turn, as those who mocked you begin to taste their own bitterness, you realize the God who stayed silent was never still. His justice was never asleep, and his protection never left your side. There's a terrifying kind of cruelty in those who find joy in the pain of others. It's not merely that they watched you suffer, it's that they celebrated it. Their smiles widened as your world fell apart. They found satisfaction in your struggle, pleasure in your heartbreak. To them, your pain was a source of entertainment, a confirmation of their own twisted superiority. But what they did not know is that the very joy they drew from your sorrow would become the prison of their own undoing. There's something holy about silent endurance. When you suffered and chose not to retaliate, when you wept and still chose to walk in love, when you were mocked, slandered and belittled but kept your heart clean, you created a contrast that heaven honors. Your refusal to return evil for evil triggered a divine reversal that cannot be stopped. Because when someone rejoices in another's agony, they invite a spiritual consequence far heavier than they realize. You may not have seen it yet, but their celebration has already begun to decay from the inside. That smile they wore while you cried, it has soured. That laughter they shared while you bled emotionally, it has grown hollow. Because what begins as joy born from evil eventually turns to ash in the soul. God does not let delight in cruelty go unpunished, and the curse they now live under is not a lightning bolt from the sky. It is the slow erosion of peace, joy, and purpose in their own lives. They thought your breakdown would be their breakthrough. They believed your destruction would elevate them, but you were never theirs to break. Your tears were not theirs to count. And now, while you are being healed, they are being haunted. They are haunted by the memory of your pain, by the echo of your endurance, by the reflection of your face that no longer holds bitterness, but radiates grace. That is what torments them the most, not that you were hurt, but that you healed. When you walk in forgiveness, you don't free them. You free yourself, and in doing so you expose their bondage. They cannot escape the truth of what they did, and no amount of pretending will erase the spiritual consequences of delighting in someone else's suffering. God is not mocked. What a person sows, they will reap, and their joy in your pain has become the field where their own sorrow grows. Now the silence they once mocked you with has become their own curse. They don't hear your cries anymore. they hear their own regret. They don't taste victory. They taste the bitterness of a joy wrongly gained. And while you rise in peace, they sink in shadows. Not because you cursed them, but because they cursed themselves the moment they smiled at your suffering. There is no such thing as a hidden act in a world watched by God. What is whispered behind closed doors echoes loudly in the courts of heaven. What is done under the cover of darkness is seen in perfect light by the one who created both day and night. They believed their cruelty was covered. They believed their intentions would never be exposed. They thought their manipulation, deceit, and mockery would remain buried beneath your silence. But heaven was taking notes, not just watching, but recording. This is the justice that comforts the wounded heart. God is not passive. He is deliberate. He is patient. And in his patience, he is gathering the evidence of every lie spoken, every trap set, every false smile shown to your face while knives were being sharpened behind your back. They thought they got away with it because time passed. They assumed silence was approval, that the lack of immediate consequence was divine forgetfulness. But God does not forget. He delays so the response is complete. There were nights you lay awake, wondering if anyone truly saw what was happening. You asked if it was worth staying kind when no one seemed to notice. But heaven noticed. Angels were assigned to your anguish. Your cries did not fall into empty air. They rose into sacred chambers where justice is born. You were not foolish for holding your peace. You were being preserved while evidence mounted in your favor. You were not weak for walking away. You were wise enough to let God handle what you could not. The ones who pretended, the ones who played innocent, the ones who acted as if they were your greatest supporters while secretly delighting in your downfall, their time is coming, not because you exposed them, but because heaven already has. Every mask they wore is decaying from the inside. Every word they spoke in secret has been entered into the record, and God is not blind to the pain they caused under the cloak of innocence. They moved in shadows, but they forgot that God's vision pierces every layer of deception. He does not need a confession. He does not require a witness. He was present in every conversation you weren't invited to, every scheme you weren't aware of, every rejection you didn't understand. While they whispered lies, heaven was scripting truth. While they laughed behind your back, God was preparing to bring everything into the light. You don't need to uncover what they buried. The wind of divine judgment is already beginning to blow the soil away. The truth will rise like a buried seed, and it will bloom where they least expect it. Their confidence will rot under the weight of exposure, not because you went after them, but because you didn't have to. Heaven already did. There is something sacred about every tear cried in silence. When the world mocks your weakness, heaven honors it as strength. Every time you wept without understanding why you were being treated so cruelly, every time you held back words that could have defended you, every time you chose to hurt in private rather than fight in bitterness, those tears were not wasted. They were collected by the hand of God himself, stored in a jar too holy for the world to see, too eternal to be forgotten. While they counted your tears as signs of defeat, heaven counted their deeds as seeds of judgment. You see, pain does not exist in isolation. It has weight. It has spiritual consequence. And the cruelty inflicted by another is not erased just because no one else saw it. Every act of malice, every manipulation, every insult that crushed your spirit, God was counting, not to burden you, but to prepare justice for you. While you were breaking, he was building. While you were suffering, he was surveying the damage. They thought they had power. They thought your silence was surrender. They assumed your compassion was permission. but they were stacking bricks of judgment with every action. They were pouring a foundation of consequence under their own feet. And now, while your soul begins to heal, their spirit begins to tremble under the weight of what they created. Because what you endure in faith is multiplied in heaven, and what they commit in cruelty is multiplied in consequence. Your tears were not random, they were prayers. They were unspoken cries for justice, and every single one of them reached the ears of the Almighty. He did not reject your pain, He received it. And He marked the source. He traced the pain back to its origin and recorded the names of those who caused it. Not because He seeks revenge, but because He is a God of balance. He cannot be righteous and overlook evil done to the innocent. They dismissed your pain as weakness, but God defined it as proof of your heart, proof of your endurance, proof of your innocence. And now the balance must shift, not by your hand, but by divine order. For while you wept, they watched. While you begged God in whispers, they bragged in arrogance. While you were on your knees, they were on the throne of their own pride. But no throne stands forever, unless it is built on truth. While God was on the throne of their own pride, but no throne stands forever unless it is built on truth. Now they cannot sleep, they cannot smile like they used to. The same pain they ignored has become the shadow that follows them. The same tears they dismissed have become the flood that reaches their doorstep. Not because you wished for it, but because the God who loves you is also the God who defends you. Your tears were not weakness, they were testimonies. And now, their deeds are not hidden, they are being counted, one by one. There's a terrifying irony in the justice of God. The waters they stirred to drown you are now rising around them. The very chaos they released into your life is circling back, not as a whisper, but as a storm. They constructed traps with careful hands, confident that you'd fall. They brewed confusion and whispered lies into your world, hoping you'd collapse under the weight of it all. But what they never imagined, what their arrogance blinded them to, is that the waves they summoned would obey no one but the Creator, and now those waves have turned. They never expected to be caught in the flood of their own evil. They never thought the energy they sent would return. They called you weak while shaking the ground beneath your feet, not realizing that God was steadying you, while allowing their pride to dig their own pit. Every accusation they made against you, every time they twisted your words, every time they misused your kindness, they were stirring the waters. They laughed while you cried, they danced while you drowned. And now their steps are slipping, their songs are silenced, and the same flood they cheered for you is sweeping through their lives without mercy. You see, when you walk with God, you don't have to repay evil. You don't have to scream your truth into ears that refuse to hear it. You don't have to chase justice when justice is already moving toward you. What they fail to understand is that the universe was never theirs to control. They are not the authors of fate, and they are not the judge of your worth. They stirred the water, but they are not the sea, and now the tide has turned. They are drowning in guilt they cannot name, drowning in regret they never thought they'd feel, drowning in sleepless nights, haunting memories, broken trust, and unraveling connections. Not because you hexed them, not because you cursed them, but because heaven made a promise. What they intended for evil, God would use for good. And part of that good is letting them feel the weight of what they did. The water always remembers who disturbed it. Their words now echo back at them. Their lies cling to their spirit like wet garments they cannot shake off. They look around and wonder why things keep falling apart, why peace keeps slipping from their grasp, why the world suddenly feels colder, darker, and unstable. It is because they are living inside the very storm they tried to send you through. The atmosphere they created for you is now their reality. What once brought them pleasure now brings confusion. Their confidence has been shattered by a force they cannot name yet feel with every breath. That force is not vengeance, it is divine accountability. That storm is not chaos, it is precision. And though you no longer cry, though you no longer beg for peace, though you've moved on, the waves haven't forgotten. The waters they stirred are the waters that are now swallowing every lie, every mask, every facade they wore to convince others you were the problem. There's a time for everything, a time to cry and a time to heal, a time to be torn and a time to be restored. And there is a time when justice arrives, even if the world has forgotten what was done to you. God's justice is not driven by noise or drama. It is not rushed, not provoked by desperation, not manipulated by human hands. It moves with sacred timing, measured and purposeful, arriving not when you expect it, but exactly when it will serve the highest good. For you, for others watching, and for those who need to be corrected. When they hurt you, they did not pause to consider the consequences. They moved swiftly, driven by ego, jealousy, or their own internal darkness. They believed they were safe behind lies. They believed they could do wrong and walk away unscathed. But God was watching, not with anger but with accuracy, not with delay but with design. And now the time has come, the season has shifted, the scale that once seemed tilted has begun to level, and the weight of their actions is catching up with them. Not all at once, but piece by piece, thread by thread. You prayed for justice when the wounds were fresh, when your voice trembled and your heart couldn't make sense of the betrayal. You asked why it was allowed. You wondered when God would intervene. But heaven does not respond in haste. Heaven responds in fullness. God allowed time, not because he didn't care, but because true justice is not about quick revenge. It is about lasting correction. It is about divine proof that he saw what was done to you and that no act, however hidden, escapes his jurisdiction. Their comfort was borrowed. Their peace was temporary. Their illusion of success was permitted for a season, not to reward them, but to prepare a contrast so stark that no one could deny the reversal. And now, that reversal is here. Doors are closing that they thought were secure. Support is fading from those they once manipulated. The smiles they wore are cracking under the pressure of their own conscience. They may not say it aloud, but they know. Something is shifting. The ground beneath their pride is shaking, and they can't stop it. But justice from God doesn't come wrapped in violence or bitterness. It arrives like a mirror, showing them who they really are, exposing what they tried to hide. It strips away their defenses, not with force, but with clarity. And clarity is far more terrifying than punishment, because it makes them feel the damage they once caused. It places them in the shoes they once laughed at. It replays the pain they thought you'd never escape, now rewritten in their own experience. You don't need to say a word. You don't need to witness it to know it's happening. The same way God allowed your suffering without announcing his plan, he is now enacting your vindication without fanfare. The appointed time has come. It did not miss you. It did not forget your cries. And as it unfolds, it will not stop until every wrong done to you is fully accounted for. It's easy to look back and say you made it through by chance, that maybe time just dulled the pain, that perhaps people moved on and things faded. But that would be a lie dressed in humility. You didn't survive because the pain grew weaker. You survived because God was covering you in ways even you couldn't see. What others mistook as luck was the unseen hand of divine protection. Strategic, intentional, and prophetic. You were not just protected, you were preserved. Not spared from pain, but kept from destruction. There's a difference. Anyone can avoid hardship by hiding from life. But you didn't hide. You were targeted. You were attacked emotionally, spiritually, and in some cases, even physically. You were pushed to the edge by people who knew how much you'd already endured. And yet, you didn't fall. You were suspended by grace, shielded by intercession, and wrapped in the armor of a purpose greater than your present pain. They saw you walk through fire and assumed the flames would consume you. They underestimated how deeply heaven had invested in you. When you were quiet, they thought you were defeated. When you kept walking, they thought you were naive. But all along, you were walking under the shadow of prophecy. A prophecy not spoken by man, not printed on paper, but etched in eternity. That you would not die in this, that you would not be defined by the evil done to you, and that you would rise as proof of God's power to protect His chosen, even in the presence of wolves. Their aim was not just to hurt you, it was to silence you, to strip you of your faith, to break your confidence in the God you prayed to. But somehow, even with shattered trust, even with eyes blurred by tears, even with a heart bleeding behind smiles, you still whispered His name. You still held on, and that was enough. Because your survival was not based on perfect faith, but persistent surrender. You didn't need to have all the answers, you just needed to not give up. And you didn't. So while they watched, waiting for your fall, heaven waited for your rise. While they mocked, heaven measured your pain and matched it with coming power. Every step you took was a declaration in the Spirit. I am still here. And being still here is not a small thing, it is victory. It is divine defiance against every curse sent your way. It is a living testimony that no weapon, not even the ones forged by people who claim to love you, could prosper. This is why their confusion grows, because they can't understand how you survived what they created. They are haunted not just by guilt, but by awe. They never expected you to still be standing, but the God who called you is faithful, and His protection was not only over your life, it was over your destiny. He kept your name when they tried to ruin your reputation. He kept your mind when they tried to poison your peace. He kept your spirit when they tried to rob you of hope. That is not luck. That is prophetic protection. And now they know. Now you know. What you carry now is not just a healed heart. It's a calling. You were not delivered just to return to life as usual. You were rescued to become a voice, a witness, a force for light in a world that tried to dim yours. You are walking proof that divine protection is real, that injustice does not win, and that no enemy can rewrite the story God has already sealed. And now the tables have turned. You are no longer the wounded soul they once watched with glee. You are no longer the victim of quiet attacks and hidden malice. You are a survivor, clothed in grace, anointed by experience, and lifted by the very God who heard what they whispered in the dark. They wanted to see you suffer, but instead, they are witnessing your rise. They are watching the blessing unfold before their eyes. The blessing they tried to block, the favor they thought they could stop. But God does not consult your enemies before He exalts you. He does not need their permission to restore what they tried to destroy. While they drown in the weight of their own wickedness, you are walking freely in the favor they never believed you deserved. And you walk not with bitterness, but with reverence. Not with revenge in your heart, but with purpose in your steps. Because you now know the truth. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared. So lift your head. Let the past fall behind you like broken chains. God has not only brought you out, He has brought you through. And everything they caused, everything they planned, everything they hoped would be your end, has become the very evidence of the God who never left your side. You are not just healed, You are chosen, and the story they try to write is no match for the glory God is about to reveal.